So you were the one who came up with this idea. Does film music count? Do you wanna sort of tell me a little bit about why you phrased the question in that way?
Yeah, sure. When I talk to everyday people, be it coworkers, friends, family, everything, usually it comes up that I'm, pretty involved in classical music and stuff, and enjoy it a lot. And I always end up asking them, even though it's a question I disagree with from a fundamental nature, but this is a topic for another show. But the whole like name classical music and that nomenclature, is very problematic. The question usually ends up coming from my mouth. Do you like classical music, or do you listen to classical music? But very often the response I get to that question is, does film music count?
So what do you say to that?
So what I say is absolutely it counts. And that very answer definitely irks some classical music aficionados the wrong way.
Do you want to
And of
start with
course,
that for a second?
yeah,
Just let's air the grievances here. So let's put you in a three-way conversation with yourself, the person who you're trying to gauge their interest in classical music, and someone
Mhm.
who's a very much the stereotypical classical music snob.
Yeah.
And you say absolutely film music counts. What exactly is the nature of the grief that you're getting from this snob person?
It usually comes in the form of an eye roll. And they'll usually say, "Oh, you mean like John Williams or Hans Zimmer or Danny Elfman?" I'm like, "Yes, exactly them." And so my like quick kind of response to that, eye roll is to challenge them to come up with any definition they can of classical music, and then explain to me how and why film music doesn't fit into that. And they usually have a hard time.
I think that's a good challenge. I mean, I certainly can't think of any reasonable response to that.
Right.
Have you heard any responses that even come close?
No. I mean, usually, you kind of go down the thought ladder, right? And, they're like, oh, well, it has to be music for the concert hall and such. I'm like, oh, so I guess we're calling the piano music of Chopin no longer classical music. It's like, right? Or they'll be like, oh, it has to be like art music. And so that's kind of a common one I hear, art music. To them, I would kind of ask, oh, well, what's art music, right? And then it kind of keeps on going. But what's your kind of initial take on that?
I've always been confused by how anyone can make any sort of reasonable distinction between the music of Wagner, say, and the music of John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to me like a completely straight line between the two of those guys. I guess in some ways I'm not the best person to ask about this, because I never understood the other side of that argument.
Right.
And I can think of several knocks that I would put on film music that don't have anything to do with its classification as classical music or not. Mm-hmm. But all of those knocks, I would have those same problems with. I do have the same problems with like most opera music, and in fact, I'd say like I think most opera music is a lot more annoying to me than even the most annoying film scores.
Interesting.
So the problem of like obviously we're talking about badly written operas and badly written film scores here, but the problem of it being sort of majority wallpaper music, that's that's not a phenomenon unique to film.
The opera analogy I think is a very fair one, because back in the 1700s and such, it kind of changed when symphonies were becoming a more standard medium in the early 1800s, in the early Romantic era. But before that, I mean, you kind of wrote music, be it symphonies, concertos, all that, to prove yourself so you could write operas, right? I mean, operas were the highest form of musical composition in their eyes, and it was also one of the highest forms of entertainment and most popular forms of entertainment too, not just high culture. Mozart's operas, I mean, Mozart really cared about his operas more than he cared about most of his other music. That's not to say he didn't write terrific other things, but his goal was to write opera. Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of classical musicians, even ones who have great intentions and respect film music, I think even still don't pay enough attention to it. Most of the orchestral music written nowadays is written for the film screen.
That's a really good point.
And I'm not saying that's bad or good. I would almost say it doesn't really matter. That's just how it is. And heck, if you want to make money being a composer nowadays, it's very hard to do that outside of the film space. I mean, there's certainly big names out there that don't exclusively write for film scores, but the inverse is kind of interesting, where most big composers have written for film, even if they're not a film composer.
I mean, I wonder if I may put on sort of my most cynical hat. I wonder if there's a part of the classical music world that loves to be apart and above the rest of the population.
Sure.
And film music really is it's the sort of most vulgar form that we have, and I mean vulgar in the sort of in the Latin sense, not as in crass, but it's really the place where I would say classical music has the most attention from the most people, like quote unquote classical music. It's a great place for people to be introduced into classical music, who are not into it before, and I think we'll probably end up talking about why that is later. But I wonder, like at my most cynical moments, I wonder if somehow the sort of derision of film music by a certain kind of classical musician is a little bit sort of wanting to protect the above and apart space that classical music likes to have sometimes.